Good morning or afternoon, or in the case of one of our panelists, almost evening. I guess it's still afternoon in Berlin. I'm Eric Schumacher Rasmussen. I'm the conference chair for streaming media, and I'm also the chief marketing officer for Ideas. Welcome to day 3 of our 10th Streaming Media Connect. We've got 5 more panels today, and then tomorrow, and I can't believe I haven't mentioned this all week, tomorrow we have a terrific workshop that I hope will appeal to some of the folks who are watching this right now. Drool-worthy gear and how to use it, some of the coolest streaming kit out there, and various folks will be showing off not just the gear, but how to actually use it. So sign up for that if you haven't yet. We're going to be back in person in Boston in May for Streaming Media East, May 18th and 19th. That's a Thursday and Friday this year, switching it up a little bit. On Wednesday, the 17th, we'll have the Content Delivery Summit and Streaming Media University workshops. Both of those websites for Streaming Media East and Content Delivery Summit are live. The programs will be going up very soon. Check it out and register early to get the best deal. Before we jump into our panel on interactivity, just a few housekeeping notes. It seems like on day 3, everyone already knows the drill. We've already had someone guess the name of the song that Steve was playing during the intro slides. So we'll announce that winner at the end of the session, provided that person is still here. You must be present to win. If you do have questions for our panel, please enter them in the Q&A tab rather than the chat. That just makes it easier for the moderator and I to keep track of them. Also, subtitles are turned on, captions technically. Actually, are they subtitles or captions? I think they're subtitles. Anyway, we can have that debate some other time. If you want to turn them off, you can go to the bottom of your Zoom screen and click on show captions or hide captions or live transcript or whatever it says to you, and select a disable transcript, and that will turn them off. Finally, all of our Streaming Media Connect sessions from this week will be available starting early next week at our YouTube channel. Steve just popped the link to that in the chat. You can always go to streamingmedia.com, click on video, and then conference videos, and see videos from this and just about every one of our past streaming media events up there. So it's the gift that keeps on giving. I'd like to thank our diamond sponsor, Signient, and we have a brief video message from them right now.
Wherever content needs to flow, the Signient platform can move any size file over any IP network at speeds that can be up to 100 times faster than traditional transfer methods. More than 50,000 businesses use the Signient platform to send and share files, automate movement of data between systems, exchange content with global partners, and move content to and from the cloud. The Signient platform gives you the power to operate at the speed you need to run your business.
And I would also like to thank the sponsor of this panel, nanocosmos. And in fact, Oliver Lietz from nanocosmos will be joining the panel as Nadine Krefetz leads them in a discussion about the future of connectivity. And we've got 7 or 8 time zones here. Nadine's coming in from the West Coast of the United States. Oliver's coming in from Berlin, and we've got folks in between. So Nadine, welcome.
Cool. Thank you very much, Eric. And I think this will be a very interesting panel. So we'll have Brian, Alex, and Jennifer join us, and we will start off. Very cool. So I think one of the things that is interesting is that we all come from different areas, and so we all have slightly different interpretations of what interactive is. And so I think what I want to do is actually start off by asking people, and we'll start with Alex and ask you, to you, what is interactive streaming?
Well, I mean, I think that the most important part of interactive streaming is how do we interact with the audience? So it's bringing the audience in, and that definition is very broad, but it can be them playing a game that's part of the content. It can be them asking questions, them voting on questions, them chatting along with it and incorporating those things. Even we've done things where they're even moving or activating things inside of our set from the audience's interactions during the event. So there's lots of different ways, but it's really how do we tie that viewing audience really viscerally, preferably, into the event that's actually occurring.
Okay, so Alex got the interaction. Now, Oliver, you've got a specific kind of delivery mechanism. So how do you define interaction for your customers?
Yeah, of course, Alex is completely right. And in terms of the interactivity with audience engagement, that's the key. And I see two major use cases for that. The one is more like enterprise corporate space, where you have kind of town hall meetings to engage the audience, to ask questions, give any kind of feedback like voting, polling, etc. The other one is more like a monetized revenue channel, which is based on things like betting, auctions, gaming elements, which directly require ultra low latency to keep up in the real-time space. So that's specific business verticals, which are also covered, which are not so much connected to OTT TV kind of applications, but which have specific business requirements, and which is not only focused on the video itself, but the complete use case and the complete workflow of a business application.
Okay. And it's funny how, in terms of terminology, I mean, I once designed interactive software a long time ago, but Brian, you've got a different environment. What's your kind of definition of interactive?
Yeah, I mean, well, so obviously I live in the TV world, right? So everything I do is glass manufactured side of the business. So for me, I do need to work within the confines of presentation, interactivity on the television itself. I know some of my, some of the folks here on the panel, they can probably play with different mediums, but for me, it's all about the TV. So when I think about interactivity personally, I think about what are we doing to enhance that viewing experience for folks? And it doesn't necessarily have to be limited to the types of use cases for interactivity, but certainly what we don't want to do is cannibalize the core viewing experience that we all know and love. We want to add to it.
Okay. All right. Okay. So we've got three different kind of takes on interactivity. Jennifer, you've done a bunch of different research in terms of that field. So what does it look like to the consumer side? What do they kind of think of as interactivity? Oops. And interactively, we can't hear you.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.
Somebody
Cool.
has to be the person who didn't come off mute. So I'm that person today.
Okay.
So yeah, from the consumer point of view, right, it's I think generally we look at it as moving from primarily lean back experience to something that's lean in. That may be first screen, in-stream interactivity. It may be a second screen experience. And there's all sorts of different use cases, right? It might be an information experience where you're getting new live stats within a sports stream for your favorite players or your favorite team. It may be commerce related when we think about shoppable ads and being able to interact with advertising for the first time. Might be more like a gaming experience, like others have mentioned already, right? Where there's sort of a gaming element, whether we're talking about wagering gaming or, entertainment gaming. Also, kind of navigation even can be interactive in certain ways. So I think from our perspective, we think about how are consumers using video and communication, especially maybe communicating with others, right? During a stream, others, whether they be strangers or that people who like this content or your family members or friends who aren't with you. So all sorts of different use cases. But primarily that is changing a little bit of that. I'm just passively watching to something that's next level, and then I can lean in and do something different with.
Okay, so and I think you've mentioned earlier that younger people have a different method of either viewing or interactivity. What goes on there?
Yeah, sure. So when we test, so Park Associates is a market research firm. We survey 10,000 consumers every quarter. I'm asking about different use cases that they're doing with their media, with their technology, right? What are they using? What are they interested in using? And of course, can look down into the demographics there. Certainly younger consumers are used to viewing video, shorter form video, more interactive video, and they're very mobile first. So we did a survey recently and found that in the 30 days prior to the survey, less than half of 18 to 24-year-olds told us that they had watched any video of any kind, right? We asked about pay TV, internet streaming video, YouTube, anything, but fewer than half had watched video on a TV screen. And I'm sure Brian's going to say that his numbers are totally different. So welcome that. But what they did tell us is that they're essentially mobile first. So more than half had watched mobile video of some sort in the past 30 days, but they hadn't all watched on that big screen. And what that just tells us is that they're natively kind of interactive video viewers, because much of the video that they're viewing already has comment capabilities, like capabilities, interactive ads for sure. So I think that tells us that this great topic that we have here today is one that's only going to be advancing even on the big screen, because our youngest viewers are taking some of that experience and expectations with them as they age.
Okay. All right. Now, for me, I'm actually really curious for you guys. Which one do you think is the most either compelling use or the most prominent one? And, this could be anything in any environment. Since I'm considering interactive here, mobile, TV, we're talking about all the mediums that you can use to deliver kind of an interactive experience. But Alex, for instance, when you think about kind of all the interactivity that you've been involved with, what's the key thing that people have really resonated with?
I mean, the most common we see is comments. Like, comments is the thing that's the first step of this. And one thing I wanted to annotate from what I talked about earlier is I mostly work in live. I've worked in live for the last 15 years, so I think about interactive as live. But before that, we did a ton of work in the early aughts of interact. We really thought that interactive TV would move faster than it did. And so a lot of it was building alpha channels, for instance, like mats for everything in the screen. So basically, you see someone using, this is a different level of interactivity I just want to bring up, is that you would see the pot the person's hanging onto. And if you picked up your controller, you could hit it and it would just show you what everything is, and you could order it and then go back to what you were watching without having to have the friction of actually going somewhere. But that was for us 20 years ago. And we, built a bunch of tests and for some folks, and then that kind of just went away. But it's hard to send those mats out. I think that when we look at interactivity, that had a lot of positive response because people didn't have any friction between when they saw something and when they bought it. So that's another layer of interactivity that hasn't happened yet in any kind of mass form that we think is going to be very compelling as that moves forward. And you really think about how to interact with the audience. So one of the things that you're starting to see, like for instance, in something like cooking, is there are more and more times where they say, we're all going to cook together and we're going to send you a list of what you need to buy, and you can order that on Amazon for Amazon Fresh. And so we can tell you that there's an appointment to go to, there's something to do, and you're going to do it with somebody, but you're going to need these tools to do it, and there's a commerce opportunity there. So
realistically though, the interactive feature now that you think is more kind of compelling is the chat feature, or
the chat feature is the most common. So the most common.
Okay.
What I will say is the most compelling is to have a positive impact on the actual video in real time. We kind of view this as right now as fissionable material because we can't actually control it. Every time we turn it on, it has so much impact that it usually takes down our streams. It rips things apart. So as an example, is we had a flamethrower. So 40-foot flames, not like a little one like Elon Musk, like a 40-foot flamethrower in a pyro stage. And we had it pointed at something. And if the people in the audience hit fire, the flamethrower, it would basically send in a command to an Arduino, and Arduino would pull a solenoid, the solenoid would pull the trigger, and off this flame would come out. We had a lot of people watching, and the first time they got to it, it's pretty slow. It took a little while for the flamethrower to go off, but as soon as they understood what happened, we got to 140,000 interactions a minute of people hitting, just going crazy trying to get this flamethrower to go off again. And every time we've done, that's one example of things that we've done in the past, and it took the event out because the database, our management system of the database was fine, but the social media's streaming database couldn't manage that many interactions a minute. And so every time we've done it, we've seen events like that where we turn something on, they can affect the show, and it blows the whole show into another level. So we know that that's a very, very powerful way to interact with the audience.
Okay, I want to kind of pull people in here and kind of just get the conversation going in terms of the interaction. One of the things that I try to do here, especially because we have a lot of people from different points of view, is so you've got kind of a certain type of interactivity available. Now, Oliver, you've got customers kind of in a bunch of different areas. Is there one form of interactivity that kind of is more compelling or that you see is used more?
Yeah, I see the largest growing part is the monetized channels like live auctions and betting, etc., because you directly monetize the content on the stream. So it's not like indirect to get more eyeballs, more visitors, and more a larger audience on your content, but directly you can monetize your content 24/7 by getting paid services around that. So that's a great challenge, and that really needs to be close to real time compared to other interaction, like which can maybe take 5 seconds for commenting. That might be higher latency acceptable. So there are also different dimensions in terms of technology requirements for these different kinds of applications.
So realistically though, is somebody who's interacting like with a flamethrower or doing chat, is that the same latency?
Yeah, probably not. So sending a command might be okay with 5-second latency, or triggering the flamethrower or whatever. I don't know if that's real time, but you need to get it back and forth. So it's in two directions. And doing a bet or a live auction or something that needs to be directly in real time, also compared to the real audience, which is on the site, for example. So that's different levels of latency I see here, and different levels of interactivity.
Okay. Brian, we talked once about what you were doing in terms of interaction, but what about the most popular version of interaction that you're seeing, that you're delivering already?
See, I think for me, it's going to be a little bit different because I'm not going to have one flavor of interactivity. It's really going to be relevant to the content that is the core content, right, that you're watching. Because we look at interactive as complementary content or value-added content, ultimately. So if you're watching, let's say you're watching a concert, right? It wouldn't make sense for us to say, hey, here's some dumbbells you can buy. Here's stats on, football players or something like that. We want to make sure that whatever we present in that interactive layer is relevant to that core content. But I also want to add, and this might be different from the other folks on the panel. For us, we typically think of interactive as an interactive overlay layer or L-bar type of presentation layer. So it might be different. I mean, I think there's going to be different motivations. There's going to be different ideation that is inherent to what you are trying to do as your business, as your brand. With us, we're going to be a little bit more generalized, and we're going to focus in though on the specific content that we're overlaying or that we're squeezing back and putting the L-bar against. So it's all a matter of relevance.
Okay. Yeah, in fact, I'm just going to go a little bit deeper on this. Jennifer, is there something you'd like to add here, or should I kind of follow up and continue on this path here?
Yeah, well, just on what's most compelling, I'll follow up there, and then I know you might want to get back to some of the exactly how it's done, right? Which is really my mind. Right. I knew that's where you're going to go. So just before we leave the what's most compelling, I thought I might just share, and I'll just talk to it to keep the conversation going here. But we did some testing on specific types of interactive features that people are using, what's most common and what they most like, some around sporting interactive features specifically, as well as around group watching. So what Alex talked about, that great use case of, doing cooking together with friends, and I'm really excited about that. But the first, kind of version of that has just been watching a movie together, starting the stream at the exact same time, and maybe having some chat features like Disney's Group Watch. Some others are doing that as well. The most common today in the sports interactivity world are the most basic, of course. It's looking at interactive stats for your teammate, the teams or the players. And then you see some streams being able to do timeline jumping, right? So get to that highlight. I don't maybe want to watch the whole match, but I just want to see the goal, and maybe it'll fast forward me to that 5 minutes right before the goal. And then interest actually still follows that too. So the most interest we see are in the most basic features, like getting that sports stats, and then getting timeline features, and then after that, sports wagering. So about a third of sports content viewers today, whether it's streaming viewers or traditional pay TV viewers, sports fans who watch sports on TV, tell us that they are interested in sports wagering. But you've got 2/3 or so who aren't totally sure how that's going to work. if they're allowed to do it, if it's legal, and whether or not they would really do that. The group watch features actually kind of below that, right? That they're still trying to find their base a little bit. About 25% of consumers tell us they're interested in trying a co-viewing feature. I think that there's still some value that needs to be proven there of how those experiences can work well and be interesting.
Okay. All right. Let me pop into a question before I go into some of the technical aspects of how you guys are doing this. So we've got a question from Jim here. It says, are you using interactive capabilities included with your webcast platforms exclusively, or have you also incorporated third-party interactive web-based capabilities? If you have incorporated third-party, how did you deal with latency or delay with web-based? Is real-time and streaming having a 10 to 15 delay from the time spoke to the viewer? Okay, so realistically.
Yeah, so it depends on the kind of interactivity you're doing. And so for the most part, I think that the obsession with latency, now I do a lot of low latency stuff, and we if I'm interacting with someone live, like right now, we need this ultra low latency. When it comes to interacting with the audience, a lot of times that latency is not as important as people would think. So usually, when we're doing Q&A, for instance, the latency can be 20 minutes. It doesn't really matter. It's when it's time to ask that question. A lot of times a lot of creators think about it because their chat systems are so bad. So because the chat system is such a churn that goes into YouTube or Facebook or other things like that, and the questions are bound up inside of the chat, it makes you have to have that low latency because you can't figure out what's next. But as soon as you start to separate those things out, you end up with a lot more control, and the latency becomes less important. If they are interacting with something live in the event, that latency needs to be a little bit more important, but you just simply manage what you're asking them to do. If they have to move something, then they can't. But the low latency is extremely important if they're interacting live with the show. If they're not, if there's interactions they can have, again, like chat, like Q&A, like all those other things, that latency can be considerably higher. The chat usually wants to be lower, but it can be considerably higher. And as long as everybody's on the same playing field, it generally works out for them because they see the chat and the video roughly at the same time.
Okay, so that's for your systems. Now, Oliver, you've got a slightly different approach to this, don't you? Because you're essentially providing the services. Do you want to give us a little background?
So that's completely what I agree. It depends on the use case, what you need. And for some applications, you might be okay with higher latency. But the use cases we are working on are really more like sub-second real time, maybe 1 or 2 second max. So that's then somehow in sync with the chat and the voting and the betting with the video. And that's required to really have that in the same time at the viewer side and to have everybody on the same page here. So that's kind of real-time interaction like we do here in this panel session together. We have the Zoom platform. Then we have the outside audience, the Q&A session, which we have here. Doesn't matter if it's 5 seconds more or less, right? So, but if you have a monetized channel behind that and you directly want to interact with the audience and get answers to their questions back, or maybe do some more with the stream, then you need lower latency. So that's the kind of low latency, I would say, is probably something like 5 seconds. It also defines who is answering the question, but ultra low means then something like 1 second, sub-second, more in the real-time space.
Okay. Brian, you talked a little bit about overlay, so we know you're kind of doing something. So what do you think about, I mean?
No, this is actually, I think Alex, hit the nail on the head. Right now, to date, for the most part, for the past few years, we've been doing shoppable TV, right? So that's basically what's on the screen and what products can we surface as a shoppable moment that's relevant to that content. How important is latency in that scenario? Probably not critical. Our latency is not overwhelming to begin with. But, you bring up, since it is very topical, we talk about sports betting as an example, right? So it's one thing to say, let's give the viewing audience an opportunity to bet on the game and say who's going to win or who's going to lose, right? You can take those bets in well ahead of that event. A prop bet's different, though. If I say who's going to, is this field goal kicker going to make this field goal or not? I mean, I'm doing that in real time. That's a problem in our world. Because as you well know, I'm sure you've probably tried to watch a game with someone who's in another state or far away, what have you, and you might be getting the game 5 minutes ahead of them. depending on, all kinds of conditions, including bandwidth. So there are certain things I think are not going to be served well, at least in the beginning, or at least in the state of technology that we are in today. But there are ways to also work around that. So when we start to get into how can you solve for some of these issues, it all comes down to how you're doing it. If you're taking in the content and then you're analyzing that content real time and then saying, okay, I see what's on the screen and now I'm going to present something, that's one way. Another way is, if you're fortunate enough, you work with that content owner, operator, broadcaster, what have you, and they set marks, and those marks you can then take in, and there's just less overhead, and it's a little bit more definitive, right, as far as that goes. And there's less chance for error with some of the algorithmic analysis that's happening to figure out what's happening on the screen and what to present. So it really does come down to a lot of different factors ultimately.
Okay. Now, I mean, let's go into the technical side of it a little bit for a moment, and then we'll get to the business models, because I think both are very important. So Alex, you had your flamethrower. Did you have to build this?
We only had to build the Arduino and the solenoid. The flamethrower was somebody else. It was a Hollywood flamethrower, so it was something we didn't have to do. We only had to build the interaction to it, the hardware interface.
Okay, so it was a real flamethrower. It wasn't a digital flamethrower.
There was fire trucks outside.
It was okay.
Yeah, it was definitely real. And I think that one of the things that we want to look at is those are the things that people get really excited about. We spend a lot of time paying a lot of attention to how the user feels. Like, do they feel like something's important? And we find that as we move more towards digital, which we do a lot of digital stuff, but we know as we keep on stepping away from the real world, it's harder and harder to make it visceral. And when we step towards the real world, it makes it more and more visceral. And so so a lot of times we are trying to figure out how to do things that are in the actual camera frame in an analog way that you're actually able to interact with. And we also do a lot of things that are virtual. We just know that those virtual things are a little bit more challenging.
Okay, we've got like the conversations going on in the chat. If you have a question, please put it in the Q&A just so I see it. Now, right now, okay, this is a kind of a combination money and functionality thing. So Oliver, you've got people who are basically making money or losing money, et cetera, in the gaming environment. So realistically, is that enough to keep them kind of compelled to continue to use it because they have kind of a very interesting interaction going on with them?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the only way it's their business model, right? So it's directly the application, and it requires interaction capabilities, real-time interaction. Otherwise, the business wouldn't run. So it's directly part of the application and part of the business. It's not like an add-on service. It's a must-have requirement in this case. And for the other cases, as Brian was mentioning earlier, I agree that there are often cases like additional requirements, additional nice-to-have expansion things, which then make the application more suitable and more engaging for larger parts of the audience. So you keep your main audience then in your main live stream and have maybe a separate application where you have additional elements for interaction with the audience. So it's also, like Jennifer was mentioning, the difference between the lean back scenario, the lean in, the lean forward scenario, which are different types of users and which creates larger opportunities for the content owners to expand their audience to more users.
Okay, so let's look at this. If we have it, we don't always have the ability to get a flamethrower, right? So, but realistically, we want to give people the technical capabilities to create more interactivity. What are the things from a technical level that we should be looking at? Like Brian, for instance, if you are trying to create more interactive programming, what do you actually really need to be the key technical features that you have?
I think for me, the first thing I'm going to do is call up Alex and figure out how to use a flamethrower in my business. Right. That's a given. Thanks. Yeah, look, I think it really comes down to what you're trying to achieve. I mean, I don't want to say there's one right way for anything. There never is, right? And that's the great thing about the world that we live in. For everyone on this panel, and I'm assuming most participants too, there's tech is just, we've come a long way. And there's a lot of different ways to solve for different obstacles, tech blockers, whatever. So there is no one right or wrong way. There is an optimized way in many cases.
Well, let's say an affordable way.
An affordable way. Well, I'm glad you brought that up because, yes, I have to be a good steward of economics at the end of the day. I can't just say, you know, it doesn't matter whatever the obstacles may be, there's a tech solve at any cost. No, we have to balance, the balance sheet has to balance out. So it really varies. But, you know, most of the innovation that we do, most of the new programs that we enact on television is done by way of strategic partnerships. So that adds another variable to the mix, right? So it's not just a one-sided thing where I say, this is my finite costs and this is how I'm going to solve for it. I have to work with a partner and we have to negotiate how that ultimately shakes out. So, you know, if I'm working on sports betting, that's one thing, right? If I'm working on, you know, some sort of, let's just say a duality, I don't want to get into too deep here, it's going to get off topic, but some of the things that I think everyone on this panel knows by now is I'm quite heavily into the metaverse side of the business, which also, by the way, we've incorporated an interactive component to that as well. But when you think about that, and we're trying to do a whole duality thing where it's like, here's the physical world, here's the digital world, and we want these things to live time synchronized together. Now you have a whole new set of obstacles that you have to work through. So it really comes down to what you want to do. But what I can say is, as much as possible, you're right, you have to live in the economics, but as much as possible, you have to figure out where you want to transact that interactivity ultimately. Do I want it to happen on the TV? Do I want it to happen in the cloud? Can I have it happen in the cloud, right? Because now I have economics associated with that as well. But again, once we solve for that, and once we figure out the optics on that picture, okay, now are we balanced out in terms of the economics, right? Because sometimes you just get to a place where you go, it's not going to work yet right now. Maybe we'll get there in the future.
And one of the things when it comes to economics, what I will say is that we kind of skipped over this a little bit when we were talking about most compelling is, in my opinion, the kinetic that I talked about, and chat is the most common. The most common one that we use is I got a little bit of feedback here. Yeah, so the thing that we use the most is Q&A and interacting with the audience. I do a show every morning for people who do what we do, media, virtual events and so on and so forth. And we literally start the first hour with just Q&A. We answer 25 questions an hour, and people just come up, I don't understand how this USB thing works, or I'm trying to find a new mic or a new light or whatever it is. And we just answer those questions. Our view time is exponentially higher. If you look at average view times across platforms, Facebook sits at about 30 seconds, YouTube, a good video, 6.5 minutes. And we're running over 1,000 of events, we're running over 70 minutes of average view time. And that's a very high number, and it's very low cost. You can actually lower a lot of the production value if you increase the interactivity with the audience, because the audience just wants to be part of it. They just want to be heard. They just want to be part of that group, and so when you start to allow them to drive the show through questions, through chat, through all those things, you can actually have a discussion on Zoom and people will find that compelling, as opposed to and I do a lot of shows where there's lots of graphics and pyro and all kinds of other things and lights and everything else. And those work fairly well, but they're very expensive to execute. So when you get back to economics, simply taking questions from the audience and having them know, the big thing is it's hard to do when you do a one-off. What you wanted to be doing is patterns. So every week, I do it every day, but every week, every month or whatever. And what happens is the audience is trained as well. They're trained to know that if I come, I'm going to get to ask questions or I'm going to vote on questions, or I'm going to be part of that conversation. And you'll find that the repeat, sequential attendance and average view time, which are in my opinion, the two most important parts of an event, are dramatically changed by simply creating all these tools that allow them to really meaningfully change the course of the conversation.
Okay, all right. Now, so from a technical point of view, you're using something that's pretty standard. Realistically, an interactive chat is something that
Yeah, the trick is really the back end
Mm-hmm.
of how you deal with all those questions and how you
Okay.
deal with all those chats. So everybody's got chat systems. Almost nobody has any. Like, we're sitting in a chat right now, and we've got a Q&A system, and that is it's very, very rudimentary.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and we build subsystems in to change how all the displays go to the panelists, whether they go to teleprompters, whether they're coming up in interactive displays. You know, so how do you make sure that those questions can be, and the chats and everything else can be meaningfully managed in the back end is a big piece of the problem that we have right now that hasn't been really solved by almost anyone.
Okay.
It's not only about the technical tools, as you say, it's different to manage that. It's also about the total user experience then, right? So looking at that Zoom interface here, it's kind of still not the best user experience. It somehow works, but I have different windows here for the chat, the Q&A, etc. And having that integrated well into a good backend, which users like to use,
Mm-hmm.
integrate that into your own business application, which you can monetize then it gets a real value and gets a large opportunity going beyond current content distribution.
Yeah, but Nadine, I'm going to add something, because we have a different slate of things that we have to think through, right? So from our side, if I want to run a certain experience, depending on what it is, and let's just say a partner says, you know, I need to run this on the TV itself. And maybe that particular model that we're targeting doesn't have the memory requirements satisfied. If we go and do an upgrade to that model, right, in support of whatever this particular use case is, that cost, right, there's a certain cost to us to do that. And of course, by the time through the supply chain, it reaches retail, as you all know, right, that cost is it's much higher than our own costs, right, because there's a lot of different parties to get it from manufacturing to shelves. So we have to think about, what is that going to do to our pricing at retail? Is that going to, is this use case so compelling that it's worth us taking that chance and then going to retail and then asking the consumer for a higher MSRP than if we didn't have that? So we have to balance that consideration as well. Now, on the flip of that, if we go, we really like this, the utility that this use case offers, and we feel confident that the audience at large is going to embrace it as well. So let's just use the TV for example, let's use the TV as sort of a thin client, and let's run it in the cloud, right? So we're just doing presentation on the TV. That's an obvious and easy solve. But the challenge there is, again, depending on the partner's business model, that has implications on their model. And then they have to figure out if they can absorb those costs. So there's lots of different considerations where economics, there's no way you do any of this without it ultimately going back to economics.
Okay.
Because it won't survive.
Let's let Jennifer kind of chime in here on some of the business models and what you're seeing.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe a little bit bigger picture when you think about it from the content provider's point of view, or the streaming services in particular, right? So, I think we're pretty bullish on seeing more interactivity, particularly in advertising and particularly on commerce, because of the shifts towards more ad-supported viewing in general, right? I mean, we're definitely in a moment in streaming that there's a major push towards base building, get as many subscribers as you can, and then chicken's coming home to roost a little bit on, well, where's the profitability, where are the revenues, and most of the major streaming services are making big changes to make that happen. New ad supported tiers coming out. So I think that we're going to see a real push to see if we can complement those revenues on the advertising side with more interactive shopping and commerce. The other piece that we see most streamers really focusing on, of course, is churn. I'm kind of interested in hearing from the others on this too, on how interactivity features could potentially decrease churn for service providers, because that is such a huge issue as subscribers come in and out of the service. Are you seeing that interactive features will make services stickier and maybe decrease some of that free trial in and out? I come in just to watch that show I want and back out. Maybe very content specific. So for instance, very premium content. I don't want to watch The Walking Dead and have a lean-in experience. I want to be immersed. I want to lean back. I want to be scared. I don't want an advertisement for a bat if you watch that, it's kind of a gruesome comment if you watch that show. But I want to be engaged in it. But so maybe it's very content specific. But do you guys see interactive features as a way that streaming providers can tackle some of their churn issues?
I mean, I think that one of the things that Disney, HBO, and Netflix do, that they're starting to do, that we're starting to see happen in this, is a lot of behind the scenes. So this is how we did the show. So you might see The Witcher, and then you see all the behind the scenes of The Witcher. Disney has a lot of great stuff behind the scenes of Mandalorian. Still, it's not really as granular as it could be. Given that you have a streaming thing, you could put a lot more content up, and more importantly, you could start having live experiences. So some of the stuff we did, some work with National Geographic, where they actually showed the show on the TV show, and then they quickly moved to in this case, a Facebook event where they right after the show, the filmmakers and some of the people that were in the show were answering questions from the online audience. So they got to watch. They got that kind of screening experience that we would see at a premiere. And then they have the people that worked on it answering their questions directly and having a discussion live in front of them. Right now, the streaming programmers don't quite have that live capability, but they're all experimenting with it. They're all thinking about it. They're all doing view with your friends kinds of things to make it a moment. But those things have a lot of legs as far as keeping the churn down, because they're relatively inexpensive once you figure out how to get the math to, once you figure out how to do the live streaming, those Q&As you could have 10 Q&As that are going on that happen after an episode, that are little things that people can do either they could do it definitely in the stream, or they could do it on a separate platform. But the point is it allows the people who are very passionate to still have all these other things that are happening outside the core content, which cost per minute is so high on most of the content. It's gotten, once Apple moved in at $250,000 a minute or higher, that starts to get, the price of poker went way up. And so everybody has to keep on rising that up. So that core narrative content is extremely expensive, surrounding it with lots of much less expensive live interactive events that help build more of the story around those things, adds value to the core content, and reduces churn, we think. And we think a lot of people are thinking about that a lot right now.
Okay, I'm going to, in fact, Brian, do you have anything? Because I have another question for Oliver, but Brian, do you want to say anything else on Jennifer's question?
I think Jennifer is absolutely right. I mean, I'll just confess, don't interrupt me when I'm watching a dramatic series, right? It's not going to go well. We're exploring as part of interactivity, watch together. We already have webcam support on our televisions. So effectively, you can watch with someone else and hold a video chat session while you're watching that content. I think that makes perfect sense when you're watching sports, because sports, for the most part, has evolved as a communal activity. We're used to doing that in a living room with multiple folks, right? You got a bowl of chips and you're watching a football game. That's normal. That's organic. When you move to something like The Walking Dead, I'm with you. I don't want to be interrupted. But I think you can be very mindful about what the interactivity looks like. So in our world, if you're watching an app, let's say, right, you have one of your favorite apps open, you're watching some content. If you then decide that you want to look for content that's relevant to you in another app or somewhere else on platform, you have what we call a teardown event. Essentially, that app is taken down, and then you open another app, and that stands up that new app experience, right? It's very much a walled type of experience, right? You have to, you're tearing one down, you're moving to the other. Interactivity, though, could afford us content recommendations without having that tear down moment. And more importantly, that interactivity, we can start to do things with interactive that my hope is that really changes the viewing experience in general. Right? Historically, TV has been a one-size-fits-all broadcast solution, right? I don't care if you're Jennifer, I don't care if you're Alex, you're going to get the same thing, like it or not. My hope personally is that we can leverage interactive to personalize your viewing experience. So we know it's Jennifer, we know what she likes, we know that she's into Walking Dead, she likes zombies. Let's go ahead and recommend some other zombie shows for her. And that's the goal, without having to tear down the app or without having to exit that moment that you're in. Because you may look at the recommendations and go, no, I think I'm going to go ahead and stay over here with I won't say any
Okay,
names.
but is that really interaction? I mean, right now you're talking more about a recommendation system, aren't you?
It is. But I think for us, and that's, I want to qualify that. For us, interactive it's more than just a chat session or something like that, right? Mm-hmm. It's basically where we can pack in AI, we can know who you are, we can present things that are relevant to you and keep you engaged. Do I think that a content recommendation is expressly interactive? No, but I do think the interactive layer itself as a vehicle offers a great amount of utility, including personalized, let's call it programmatic or content recommendation that's relevant to Nadine specifically.
Okay. All right. Now, one of the things, so Oliver, you've got a slightly different audience here that is using the applications in your environment. And so realistically, you've got a financial commitment in a lot of the use cases, right? So we're not necessarily talking about churn here, but we're talking about kind of the business model. And are your customers sharing with you information about how compelling their business model is to their audiences?
Yeah, somehow, of course, not all details, but we get a bit insight because we also have an analytics system where we see a lot of metrics, which are, on the one hand helps in tracking down possible issues, but on the other hand also gives some insight on the outreach and the audience, etc. And we see really the vast majority on mobile. So it's really mobile first for everything, actually. We don't see actually almost nothing on TV. So it's completely different to the other applications. And that means that there is an opportunity here for these kinds of application. I don't know if how large the audience is on TV meanwhile, but more and more content goes to mobile, goes away from the lean back, sitting on the couch experience. You want to enjoy things on the mobile while on commuting or wherever you are, and do some interaction with the presenters. So that's interesting business models coming here, and that's a big opportunity also for traditional content providers also to expand their audiences, to additionally provide services which are directly focused on these platforms to get more business out of that.
So now I know you guys are all in different areas, which means that you all have kind of a different focus in terms of where the interactivity is, at least for your audiences. But why don't we think about kind of the future? Where are we going with the known things, maybe not the flamethrower, but how are we recommending to people in the future to design interactive experiences for any one of these screens? It's got, whether it's a TV, it's a mobile, it's going to be something that's within an audience. I mean, right now we've got chat going on while I'm talking. It's like, aren't you guys paying attention to this panel? So what do we see for the future?
Well, I think that one thing is, to just what you just said, is embracing the fact that there's lots of things going on. One of the things that we find is that chat and Q&A specifically greatly increase average view time. So people having other things to do. When you only have a screen with no interactivity, you are living and dying by every pixel that you project to that screen. And in our world, you have 10 or 15 seconds of being boring before someone finds something else to watch. And so a lot of times we build interface heavy interaction. So we embed a video for someone to watch, let's say, if and all the chat is all visible. Like a lot of people hide the chat and they hide the Q&A. We bring it all out because it gives you something else to do and to see while you're watching something that may not be moving as fast as you'd like it to. And so what we find is that that all of those things happening at the same time allow people to constantly be shifting without changing the channel. This gets back to what Brian was talking about. What you don't want them to do is change the state of what they're doing. You want to find out how can we keep them connected and stay in the same app space or web space or wherever they're at without going somewhere else by choice.
Okay.
Yeah.
One thing that I reached to now is whether Jennifer's got research on this, but Brian's raising your hand. Okay, Brian, you talk, Brian.
I have to bring this up. Alex, I saw the comment about the remote, and I get it, especially when you're talking about chat, but we do have speech to text, capability. So there's always, where there's a will, there's a way.
I think it can't. It's there. Like I think that the remote could be the remote is a very difficult thing to work out. I don't even like the Apple remote. I mostly interact, I admit, into my Apple TV, and I don't even like that remote. I don't think anyone's really figured out remote.
And
it's
Alex,
a huge part of the problem, because you open it up and you got a bunch of buttons and you're like, I don't know how to do this. Or you hit the interactive button and now you get a whole bunch of other things that you didn't want. And I think that is where companies like LG really, that's a big opportunity for innovation.
We're already there, because here's what I'm going to push my wares, and I'm going to brag a little bit. But LG TVs, we have the magic remote, right, which is that free air cursor. So I agree with you. Up, down, left, right, enter is not the most ideal mechanism for a lot of these things, but we have some things that in place that actually do aid a better experience.
And I will say, I have a bunch of LG, and I love that cursor. The cursor, so that the LG has innovated there, where you can move the cursor around and select what you need. It makes a huge difference.
But I think that harks back to what I was saying. Like, if there's an issue, right, then we just figure it out, right? You get creative and you figure it out.
Okay, so we're talking about what can we recommend in the future.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the things, Jennifer? Like, what do you think that people who you do research with would want to see?
Yeah, so just to hop in on what they were saying, our data does show an increase in use in voice for TV control. Mm-hmm. So using that voice feature of the remote to get to what people want faster, because navigation is such an issue and because that input is such an issue. I think in the future, maybe one of the challenges that really needs to be addressed is identification. So in a mobile platform, you're really doing a personal video interactive stream, and you know that person, that individual, who that individual is. And if you're doing a personalized experience or you're doing chat, it's a 1-to-1 ratio, right? On the TV, you have a larger issue where you may have social viewing, you may have a whole family watching a sporting event, right? And so is the interactive experience that we're building something that's great for a group like in sports, which is perfect, or does it need to be more personalized? And then how do you identify who's viewing, right? Do they have to select a profile, which plenty of people don't set up a profile for every app, for every screen, for everything that they're viewing, right? Is it camera-based? Is it voice-based? I think that personalized, very easy user interfaces is what I want to see in the future, but I do think there's kind of an identification piece when it comes to TV that's going to be the key to really getting us to some really cool new experiences.
Okay. All right. Now, Oliver, we're not all on TV, right? We're also in the mobile environment. So what are the things that you're thinking about in the future that you'd like to see your customers being able to develop for?
TV. Sorry.
Yeah, actually, as you said, second screen, I would say mobile as first screen for us and our customers. But anyways, it's a great opportunity and challenge as well to further expand on and be creative on providing content. So the audience wants to be entertained somehow, even in enterprise corporate spaces. They want to somehow enjoy the content and be interactive, and how the content is presented and how you can interact with that in terms of user interface, user engagement, user experiences makes a big difference. So I've seen exciting content in town hall meetings in the corporate space where the presenter, the CEO, is really engaging the audience, giving them insight into what they do, and engages them to ask questions and directly interact with the questions which are coming in. And they do it with simple, reliable tools like the platform, the video platform, which is just the video element on the screen, and additional some very simple Q&A things like Slido, for example, can provide. So there's really simple things available, but additionally, there's a great chance to also improve on the user experience for certain new use cases and get more engagement on the content you can provide. So it's not only the technology, it's also the whole end-to-end experience, which you need to have in control, but which also needs to run stable. So content owners can rely on the systems they're using.
Okay, we have a question from the audience. I'm going to break into the TV versus mobile argument here, and the other discussion is more about what we're calling second screen. But let's go to Gary first. Okay, how many of the interactive features that are offered are based on a real research about what people want versus offering something that is possible to do? Well, that's an interesting question. Do people want primarily passive viewing experiences, or really want the ability to drive the experience more directly? Are people fundamentally lazy and really don't want to make this effort to be interactive with friends and groups? Okay.
I think that one thing I will say there is and I know that we have some people research, as I'm not a researcher. just do a lot of events. So most of my experience is mostly just from actual like doing it. And I find that research is very hard to do in this environment because people say things that are not in parallel to what their actual actions. And so what we're always doing is changing these things, and we've been changing them for the last 15 years to figure out those kinds of things. What I will say is that narrative and narrative and nonfiction are very different worlds. So when you talk about, we haven't found much success at all in narrative. So write your own story or do those things that have been largely a disaster because it's really, really hard to build all the branches, and it's really expensive, and then no one uses them. And so it's a huge money suck to do that. Where we do see an enormous amount of interactivity is dealing with things that people care about, that they're passionate about, whether it's cooking or history or Photoshop or whatever that is. And we have to remember back in the old days, we used to talk about this a lot. When you went to the Borders bookstore or Barnes and Noble or whatever, the fiction section was one little section, and the rest of the entire bookstore was nonfiction. And so we have to remember that we think a lot about that, but when we look at what's actually happening, what people are actually buying in bulk, we're really talking about nonfiction, about things that they care about. And in those areas, there's lots of opportunities to build communities. And I think that the thing we really have to think about as we look forward is that we're not, a lot of people will say content is king, but it's not. Community is king. Content is the honeypot. So content pulls you in, but you have to figure out, as we build these interactive systems, how do we use those to build a community, build ongoing interaction and an ongoing connection to the audience that we're serving.
Okay. Just from the research side, I'll just really echo what Alex is saying, that a lot of these very innovative features, they're experiential in nature, right? So you can ask consumers questions all day long about what they might like, right? But oftentimes they have to experience it first, and then you can ask something similar to this experience. We're doing a lot of research, for instance, on metaverse, and consumers don't know what that is, but you can ask them about their Snapchat filters to get to AR. You can ask about certain virtual reality or cryptocurrency and pieces of the metaverse that they may have experienced to understand what might be next. So sometimes there is a little bit of a build it and try it first, and then see what part of that is compelling, and then move to the next thing.
Okay. Well, it's been an interesting conversation with you all. We kind of have to wrap it up because they're going to come back and tell me that we have to wrap it up. But any last thoughts? I know Eric's like, no, you've got any last thoughts? We'll go around really quickly. Alex, you've said some interesting things. Just give us 10 seconds of whatever it is you're thinking in terms of this field.
When it comes to media, interactivity is the next big thing.
Okay. Oliver?
Yeah, that was almost the best final words to hear. But we see so many different applications here. It's really exciting to see that growing all around the different industries and applications. So there's a great opportunity. So encourage our audience to work on these things.
Okay, cool. Jennifer?
See more innovation and ad-based interactivity, just because so much more of the money and the focus is on making ad revenues work.
Okay, Brian, you got the last word here.
Oh, the last word. That's a lot of weight. No, I think we're just keen on introducing the world at large to the best viewing experience that we can bring to bear.
All right, cool. We're done. Unfortunately, we got no more time. Thank you, Eric. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. That was a terrific discussion, as I knew it would be. Going back to the top of the hour, the winner of Name That Tune is Arturo Ledesma, who came in first with the identification of Ramsey Lewis's cover of Stevie Wonder's Living for the City. Arturo, nice job, and keep your eye out on your email for that gift card information. Thanks again to Signiant for sponsoring this whole week, and to nanocosmos for sponsoring this session. We'll be back at 11:30 a.m. Eastern, when the one and only Evan Shapiro will be moderating a roundtable on brave new monetization strategies. See you then.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Eric. Take care.